This episode is brought to you by Indie Film Hustle Academy, where filmmakers and screenwriters go to learn from top Hollywood industry professionals. Learn more at ifhacademy.com. I'd like to welcome to the show Jeff Cronenweth. How you doing, Jeff?
I'm excellent. Alex, thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much for being on the show, man. I've been a fan of yours for a long time because I am a lens geek. I'm a DP geek in the sense of how things look and stuff like that. And I've studied your work as a director and as a colorist for a long time. Especially the work you've done with music videos, your stuff with Fincher, your stuff with Romanek, right? Is Mark Romanek?
Yeah,
I pronounce it right.
Yeah.
Romanek, yeah, all that kind of stuff. So before we jump into the weeds with you, man, how did you get started in the business?
Well, true nepotism, if you will, but longer story than that. My great-grandfather owned a camera store in Pittsburgh. My grandfather was a portrait still photographer for the studios on staff at Columbia. Well, throughout his career at various studios, but they used to have an Oscar category for still photography. You know, you have to put yourself in that era and realize like the technology prevented them to taking pictures next to us on set like people do nowadays. And so they had their own sets and directed the talent and built the sets. And that was the sole source of publicity for, the entire movie. So there was more weight on that. And so he won an Oscar for action still photographer. He have a picture of Judy Garland and Mickey Rooney in 1941. And then my father, who is Jordan Cronenweth, shot Blade Runner amongst Blade Runner, Peggy Sue Got Married, Altered States, State of Grace, and then including Oh Father music video with Fincher and Rattle and Hum with Phil Joanou. And so I always had been around it from early age, visiting the set and just loved the camaraderie and the kind of common goal of accomplishing or overcoming that day's complications. And it just seemed like a great team creative sport to me. And I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew I wanted to do something in it. It's like every morning they went to war and every day at the end of the day, they came back and kind of celebrated the victory of that day. So it was intriguing to me. And so I followed in his footsteps. I started junior college, and there was an opportunity with the goal of going to USC Film School, and there was an opportunity to get into the union. So my dad called and said, "Stop going to school right now, come join." It was very difficult in those days to get in. And so I went and worked for about 2 years as a staff loader at a commercial company in Hollywood. The debate at the moment in our family at that time was he was about to start Blade Runner. I was 19 years old. It was a very high scrutinized movie. It was the only thing going on in town. Ridley Scott's first movie in the United States. There was all kinds of tensions on the set. It was a lot of nights wet, and he thought that it was a crapshoot if I went for that I would get into the IA. Instead, he said, your better chances are of going and working at this as a staff loader at this company. And if no one's available in 30 days, you get in and then you learn all about camera gear and that stuff. So I didn't do Blade Runner at his, but quite honestly, at 19, that movie was really a handful. And I think Instead, I ended up like prepping 5 camera shows a day for commercials of different packages and different gear and different EPs. And, of course, what I would love to have had a Blade Runner on my resume. Instead, I just went after work every day and watched until I got tired and went home.
So you were on the set. You were actually hanging out watching your father work.
Yeah, I was on set as much as I could. Yeah, I was working in Studio City, and they were at the Warner Brothers on the backlot, so it was quite close. And then after I got in and after I worked for a year, I went back to college and graduated from film school at USC. And in my class was Phil Joanou, Robert Brinkmann, John Schwartzman. You can go on, but there was a few of us that all stayed friends. 3 of us became DPs. Phil went on to direct. and he directed a movie that, you know, my dad shot, State of Grace.
Mm-hmm.
So amazing looking, authentic looking movie for that period. And then I worked for Phil for years after that, you know, shooting commercials and music videos and all kinds of things. So I kind of went and then I went the craftsman route, you know, like it's a great segue because Robert Brinkmann and John Schwartzman came out, and music videos were just starting to materialize.
Right.
And so they shot a lot of corporate movie, industrials, we called them.
Sure.
And learned by making their own mistakes, but actually shooting. I did it the other way. I was a film loader, then I was a second assistant, and then I was a first assistant, then I was a camera operator. But the sets I was working on were the biggest sets going at the time, you know, and so I watched, or the idea was that I would watch masters solve problems. I wish I paid more attention later, but
ain't that the truth?
I was like, oh man, how would he have solved this problem? And so, you know, I had a great, I worked with my dad, of course, and John Toll, and Laszlo and Gordon Willis and Haskell and Vilmos, and I did 8 movies with Sven Nykvist, and
wow,
and they all had different styles and different personalities, but they all had the same kind of low key, not insecure, listen to anybody that had a good idea, wasn't threatened, great camaraderie on the set, great control and set management. And so I was very fortunate to learn and watch all of them. Ironically, Schwartzman and Brinkmann probably beat me by a couple years until I was shooting the same size movies that they were shooting. But we all got to the same place. So, you know, I guess at the end of that long story, there's not really one way better than the other way. For me, I think we're individuals. For me, I needed to mature more and watch and learn slowly, and but there is no replacement for hands-on doing it yourself. So it's a combination of both.
Yeah, I think it's also there's a lost art of The Apprentice. I mean, The Apprentice. I mean, that's the only way. When I was coming up in the '90s, I mean, that's how I learned. I was on set. I was learning behind someone who had done it before, and there is still that, obviously, in the camera department specifically, but it's not as the apprenticeship is not something that is done as much as it used to be. It's kind of like a lost art almost. Like all this, I mean, you just laid out years of work, you know, working a couple years in a camera shop. The amount of knowledge you got about those film cameras back then. I mean, when you finally got on set, you were like, yeah, I know that. I know how to do that. And because you've done it all. But so many DPs nowadays, it's just like, well, I got a Red camera. I'm a DP.
And there is truth to that, but I fear there's no history behind the choices being made. Do you need it? No, I suppose you can just make pretty pictures and that's fine. But there's a lot of logic about where the industry came from, why we compose or photograph things a certain way, and continuity, which is a hard thing to learn. Because it's really easy to shoot a pretty master. It's really hard to do 2 days of coverage of that master to make it look like that same 2 minutes of time, but make each shot stand out and be beautiful. And that's what separates the men from the boys, or from the adults from the children, if you will. And so that's something that's harder to deal with. And then, you know, managing a crew is a lot of being successful on the set. Right. And dealing with studios and figuring out how to navigate through the complexity of that, and egos and personalities, and you know, getting what you need to get to visually support the movie the way you want to support it. So those are all things that I would not trade for anything, and that I see could be something that's more challenging for young filmmakers that don't go that route.
Yeah.
That said, when I went to USC, there was no internet, and there was no downloading cable, and there was no DVDs, and there was no VHSs, I don't think. Let me think about that. There had to be VHSs, right?
What year they just started?
82. But my point is, you had to go to a place like that in order to see all the classic movies and review them and talk about them and dissect them. You couldn't just click on something and watch a scene. It didn't exist. If you were lucky, there might be a midnight show at some off small theater in Hollywood. You can go watch a classic film. And so learning that and that history and that knowledge was something that today you can click on a movie, you can dissect that movie, you can look at a particular scene that you want, you can count the frames, you can analyze each frame, and usually there's a whole lot of discussion from either the director or somebody else on the show that describes what happened or why it happened and those things. So in a way, it doesn't replace doing it yourself. That's the thing. Like, no matter what you read or write or learn or watch, you still got to make films, and you still got to photograph, and you still got to try to cut things together and find out why it works and doesn't. But that was the reason that it was so important at that time. And nowadays, I think there's such a enormous amount of resources available to filmmakers that it does shortcut it some degree, right?
Yeah, because I remember in the 80s, there was nothing about filmmaking, like nothing. You couldn't even, you had the occasional Star Wars making of or Raiders of the Lost Ark making of VHS, and then you had Criterion Laserdiscs, and that was.
But that was later than Laserdisc.
I'm talking about like 88 to 92, in that world is when those came out. But in the early 80s, you had to go to libraries and go find books about what you apprenticed. And
if you remember, there was one bookstore in Hollywood. I think it's Ed Bookstore.
Abe. Right? Oh God. French. Yeah, it was over in Studio City. They shut down a little while ago.
There was an old one in Hollywood as well. There was the one in Studio City off of Lankershim, which is the one Laurel Canyon, which you're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah.
And those had a plethora of dusty film books that you could go and learn about, a director that Fellini or like that.
Right.
And now you either you download the book on your iPad or you order the book on Amazon or whatever you do, and it's all right there at your fingertips. So it's different, but still getting a camera in your hand and doing it is ultimately what it is. It doesn't matter what the camera is, whether it's your iPhone or a camera, it's still telling stories starts there, and that's what you got to do.
Now, one of your great collaborators of your career is Mr. David Fincher, who I'm a huge fan of Mr. Fincher. And he's our generation's Kubrick, in my opinion, in the way he makes his films. Specifically, Fight Club is. Anytime anyone asks me my top three, Fight Club's always on the top of that list. I've had Jim Uhls on the show, who wrote Fight Club. And I got to find out, first of all, how did you meet David? And you've done a few things prior to music. You did a bunch of music videos as well. How did you meet him, and what is the working relationship like? How do you work with David Fincher in 1995 versus David Fincher, Gone Girl?
Yeah, those are all great questions. I met him, fortunately, through my dad. We did a music video called "Oh Father" with Madonna. It was the last video on that album, and it was a black and white video.
I remember it.
Kind of alluded to a not great relationship with a celebrity actor that we all knew, and we met on that, and then we did a couple commercials, and one of them was AT&T, all about what to expect in the the And
I remember that. I remember that campaign.
Yeah, and they just had like a 20-year or 30 years.
Yeah, I remember that
relaunching of it because it was so accurate. It had a pad, which we had never seen before. It wouldn't come to fruition for another 20 years or 15 years. But we had a guy with an iPad on a beach in St. John.
Yes. Yeah.
And then toll booths that were operatorless. You just had a sensor in your car.
I remember all these. Yeah.
A shot of a baby monitor with a dad somewhere else looking at the baby, and a classroom with a computer and a projector that had the kids are all working off of laptops, and it was really clever, as you would expect with David, and they wanted to shoot. They could only afford to shoot it here in Santa Monica at the beach scene, and he just felt like it didn't have the weight to support the concept, so he took me and the AD and his producer, and we went to St. John. And he told me, well, let me go back one step. After the Madonna video, he gives me a call and goes, I need to shoot an insert of Madonna's teeth with stitches and pearls dropping on the floor. And Panavision said they'd let us do it. And I go, great. And he goes, meet me at Panavision at 2. I go, good. And he goes, bring your meters. I'm like, what? Meters? I'm a focus puller. And so I went, he goes, this is what I want to do. Match your dad's light. And he left. And I'm like, oh, God. And I lit it, and it all cut in. You know, it was great, the way it all fit together. And then he asked me to shoot this thing in St. John with him. Then I shot second unit on The Game. I shot second unit on 7. I was in London with my dad and him when we started Aliens 3, but the studio, my dad had Parkinson's disease, and he was working right through it. And, you know, truth be told, there was a lot of animosity about foreigners being there at the time. You know, the film industry was dead. They wanted it all, you know, crew from London, not just the Brits. The production company wanted it. Fox wanted it. Everybody wanted it all to be local. And so we went, and they felt as the scale of the movie got bigger, he wouldn't be able to keep up. So we got let go. And David, heartbroken, said, listen, if you guys aren't here, it's just me. It's an easier arm wrestling match for me because they don't have you to hold over my head, and it'll just be me up against them. And so it was his first show and stuff. So all those things were building a relationship. Wow. And then, of course, The Game. And then he called me when he had Fight Club and said, come over. And I went over to his house, and he's like, this, you know, Brad jumped the wall the other night and knocked on my door and said, you got to read this book, and then sat there while I read it. He wouldn't leave until I finished it. And so I think it's, these are his words, I think it might be the best movie he gets to act in. It'll probably be the best movie I direct. And it may not make any movie. It may not make any money. But read this and tell me what you think. And if you're interested in shooting it, I'm like,
holy
I
cow.
heard the answer before he finished the sentence. But of course I played it like you would, and like, okay. And, you know, danced all the way to my car. And then read it, of course, and was in love with it. I didn't know how we were going to shoot it. It was a very complicated script and so much going on. It was quite overwhelming at first. And I think a lot of us weren't 100% confident in how it would be received until it got closer to being finished, you know, because it was such an interesting story. And David had he really had in his mind the tempo and the cadence of the B and the nuances that were pushing boundaries that we were all like, kind of like, I mean, that's what you want, of course, because you want to ruffle some feathers along the way.
Right. No question. But it's really interesting because, I mean, you know, talking to Jim, I mean, that's an unmakeable book. It's an unadaptable book, first of all, so that the script was even made is remarkable. Then the script is almost unfilmable. When you read the Fight Club script, it's like, how? And then that you guys actually pulled it off in the way that you did. I mean, it's a masterwork. And I remember when it came out in the theater, I saw it in the theater, and it is aged very well. It was not as well received, and it didn't make a whole lot of cash when it came out.
It's funny. We shot all these great commercials that were as irreverent as the movie was, you know, like Brad standing in a movie theater going, in case of emergency, the lights will light up on either side of the rows. Here are the 2 exits, and remember, don't let anybody touch you in the bathing suit area. You know, things like that. And,
that's awesome.
You know, Columbine had happened that summer before, and so everybody was quite aware of violence and fight. So the idea was not to market the film as a fighting film, but because it's really not. Those are metaphors and different things. But they didn't do it. You know, he didn't have the publicity control at that point in his career. And they put out all this fight footage, and, you know, my parents went to see it because I made it, but they thought it was a boxing movie. based on
commercials. It's called Fight Club. Yeah, that's exactly the way they marketed it. Yeah,
and that's what they showed in the trailers and stuff. And so that was unfortunate. It did not work. It was a flop. But ironically, in that first meeting, Fincher was like, "I want this to be our generation's Blade Runner, in that it describes what the '90s kind of what it feels like to be in the '90s." And Blade Runner was a failure when it came out as well. It wasn't until 10 years later or 5 years later that it blew up. And the same thing when the DVDs for Fight Club came out, It went right to the top. It was enormous. And then it became a cult film, and then both Blade Runner and Fight Club are in the National Archive. Yeah,
that must be awesome. So to go back for a second, that moment when David said, "Hey, match your dad's lighting on these close-ups," if you wouldn't have done a good job there, a lot of your career might have not gone the same way. Just that one is a possibility, right? Like if you would have screwed up that day, or didn't have the knowledge base to be able to do that from all those years of working hard just for that one shot. And David, I think at that point, David was still, David was David in the commercial world. Like propaganda was up and running, and he was a big deal in the commercial world. So it's fascinating that one moment. I just go back. I'm like, if he would have screwed up that, does he call him again? does he ask him to do another video?
He would have called my dad, so we would have worked together again. But I don't know that he would have had the trust in me to do what later came.
Right? No, exactly. Now, can you explain to people what it was like shooting music videos and commercials in the 90s? Because that's my decade. I went to film school during that decade, and I actually had one of my good friends was the vault operator at Propaganda, and he would send me VHSs of David's reels. This is pre-internet. This is before everything was, so I could watch him and Michael Bay and Spike Jonze and Fuqua and all. So he would send me these compilation reels of all this stuff. I saw the game promos before anyone saw the game promos, like that with that maquette. What is it? The puppet flying in the air and all that stuff. So I was really deep into Propaganda, and specifically Fincher. And can you explain to people what it was like with those budgets, with that kind? It was an insane time for music videos.
It was fantastic because there was a bunch of very young filmmakers that were unbridled, and each job or each song that came up, someone was trying to do something that hadn't been done before, or a different perspective on it. And you would watch and you're like, oh my God, how do that? Or Jake Scott shooting entire video backwards in reverse, or shooting on Super 8, or shooting, Harris Savitas baking film for a whole video, so that it all had all the kind of warping textures to it and everything. So it was a wild west of shooting, and almost anything went, but there was an enormous amount of competition, and people, very creative people, competing against each other. And so the budgets at that time, this is pre-Napster, so the videos were generating an enormous amount of income and sales, record sales. And so the budgets were enormous. I Harris Savitas photographed Scream, but I operated and shot second unit on Scream, and Scream, is at least, if it's not the top, it's right there at 7.2 million with Janet and Michael together.
Jesus, it was, I think, the most expensive at the time. I think still is.
It might be. Yeah, I don't know. But the budgets were incredible. $1 million, $2 million, 500,000, 750, all were reasonable budgets, but the quality of the work was really, really interesting, and the ideas were new and fresh, and interpreting different musicians, and rap was just coming in, and so you had the hip hop before rap, and then you had Janet and Michael, and Madonna and Bowie and George Michael, and you just had a lot of interesting artists that were all blooming at the same time. And the good ones like Madonna and Michael and Janet, they took the videos very serious. There was a lot of artists that were young, and they'd be hungover, they'd show up 5 hours late, and you're looking, just going, this isn't for me. You know?
Like, this is going to be out there forever. So you do you.
I'm going to pay the amount of money if you show up or don't show up today. So, so there was a big difference between like people dedicated and, they always had interesting concepts with good stories that were that did the songs justice, but weren't just like a band playing on a pedestal somewhere,
Right.
lifted up. And so it was really quite amazing and exciting. I think I shot maybe 350 music videos or something to that degree.
That's insane. And like when you did something like, Freedom with George Michael, like, which was a revolutionary music video because he wasn't in it.
Exactly.
And David, and you put that together. Well, first of all, it's an amazing song. But like the explosions of the explosions on the bass hit and things like that with the guitars blowing up and the jacket blowing up. I mean, it's for people that weren't around during that time. I mean, I was working in Miami, in the Miami market, and where Gloria Estefan and all those guys were, and they were getting $1.5 million budgets. Second and third tier artists were getting $250 to $500, and I was working on those. I was just like, can you imagine that today? It doesn't make it.
I still do maybe one or two a year.
Yeah.
I love them, but I don't go out and seeking them, but they come one or two a year. And it's like the last couple have been Taylor Swift, Katy Perry, Maroon 5. And they always have a fair amount of money to do it right.
Right.
What changed a few years ago is they figured out how to monetize
the videos,
music again, and the videos, and kids buy downloads of the music videos. So the videos have, not only are they presenting the song, but they buy them to watch over and over again. And so, it'll never be what it was, of course, but it could come back to some degree where you have decent budgets to make videos that make statements and really promote an artist.
Yeah, because now, I mean, you throw it up on YouTube and you just monetize it on YouTube and you got 1 billion views. It's a pretty nice chunk of change that's going to come into your pocket or to the studio or the label's pocket. But whoever's paying. So there are ways still now where some of these artists that you're just naming, every time they drop a video, it's 100, 200, 500 million, billion, watches. So it can happen. But like nobody names like second, third tier acts have $500,000. Those days are gone.
Days are probably gone. Yeah.
Those days are definitely gone. Now, speaking of music videos, you also worked with another, trailblazer with Mark Romanek, who I'm also a huge fan of, and his work with him. What is how you also shot his film 1 Hour Photo, which I absolutely adored with the late great Robin Williams. How did you approach that film? Because the look of it is so, oh God, it just feels like there's that fluorescent light coming down on you and you just feel off watching it. How did you approach that creatively with him?
It was a baby movie in comparison to Fight Club budget wise,
Sure.
And so there was certain strategies and things that you had to do that because you had to be financially responsible and you had limited resources. But the wonderful thing about that movie for me, and what I loved about it is it had 3 worlds that he lived in. It had the store, which was his safe place, his ethereal place where he was God and he could view these people's lives and make judgments and then react. And then there was their house, the family he was obsessed with, which is very warm and loving and at least on the surface, as we find out later. And then his cold and industrial apartment that he lives in that was void of personality except for the wall of other people's lives that he made, right? And so that gave me 3 distinct worlds to light differently, within that budget. And that was really fun to do. And the thing that I love the most is, you're going to be in a store, and Mark really wanted it to feel overlit in the sense that it's coming from the top and it's a big box store. And so I'm not necessarily a fan of top light. Just don't like what it does in general to people's faces. But we created these fixtures that you could look at and see a little bit of light, but they didn't really have any impact coming down, but they shot up, and we painted the ceiling white. And so it all was bounced soft light off the ceiling that gave this kind of ethereal glow in there. And then you could go back and you can analyze it, and that's his heaven, and that's his world, and this is this, and the light's coming down from there. But it was really just this beautiful, I mean, that all fit into the story, but it was this beautiful soft light. So you took this really industrial building and made it something that was prettier, but still had the personality that Mark wanted reflected and visually to match the story. And so that was, we bought all these old fixtures and from a salvage company, and then cut holes in them and put them up and made those work, and then shot in that store. What was rather trying was we shot in there for the first 2 weeks, I think, or 3 weeks.
Right.
And so you want to, it's okay to have you want a balance in the movie. You want up and downs, light and dark, shadows and things that you can see. And going to dailies for the first 16 days, all that footage was in that store, and it was all this white, low contrast thing. I was losing my mind. I'm like, what am I shooting? This is there's nothing to balance against. But then, of course, once we got out and we started getting into the other worlds, and I was able to manipulate contrast and light and have direction now as opposed to top and stuff, it really balanced out the movie, and it has a really cool look for it. And I definitely served the story.
Now, you just brought something into my mind when you said contrast. I mean, a movie like Fight Club, and Seven that you did second unit, but on Fight Club, the contrast is so beautiful. I mean, it's just beautiful, and that was kind of like a Telltale Fincher-esque thing. He loves blacks. He loves to go deep into the blacks. How much of that was that all in camera, and then you tweaked it a little bit in the lab? Because in '99, DI hadn't come out yet, right? Oh, Brother Where Art Thou didn't come out yet, right?
No,
right.
That was all film lab.
That was lab. So that was in camera and lab work that got that insanely crisp and just pristine look, right? Yeah.
Then that was straight up. There was no cross processing or any of the things that they had done on Seven.
Right.
It was straight up. It's the way we shot it. It's terrifying.
Oh yeah, because you're on the edge, and that's the thing. Yeah, when you work with David, I'm assuming you're always on the edge on a lot of things. I mean, yeah, same thing with Girl with a Dragon Tattoo and Social Network.
I'll tell you a little story.
Yeah, man.
Don't lose your train of thought.
Sure.
It was my first feature as the main DP, right? So it was a big,
not a bad one to start with.
Not a bad one. I put more pressure on myself than David or the studio did. Because I didn't want to fail him. I had so much respect for him that I didn't want to be the one loose, bolt in the entire ship. So we were shooting a scene of Ed Norton with insomnia, laying in bed, wide awake, overhead shot. And we had the sheets tea stained. In other words, they took some of the bright white off the sheets, but it wasn't to the level we wanted it to. And so we were really struggling with making it feel like nighttime, being dark enough, still seeing him, but not having these glowing white sheets. And he kept going, it's too bright. And I'm like, David, it's not too bright anymore. We're getting really close to it. Not going to be an image there. And he's like, it's too bright. It's too bright. And we shot it, and it was too dark. And I was already like, oh, okay, that's it. Well, when they come looking for the guy to blame, I'm done and I'm out of here and all that. And the next day he's like, well, you're right. We pushed too hard. We'll shoot it again tomorrow. And he looked at me and he goes, listen, if we're not making mistakes every once in a while, then we're not pushing boundaries. We're in a safe zone that nobody wants to be in. And that's not what we're here to do. We're here to change things and push things and break boundaries and not repeat ourselves. And so it's only money. It's a big movie. We've scheduled time for things that don't work out, and we'll shoot it again another day. And that kind of has served me to this day, because you put it in perspective. If you're doing something where it doesn't have a lot of money and you're risking losing a scene, then that's being irresponsible. But if you're pushing the boundaries and you're taking advantage of everything that you have, and you are going for it, it's okay to make a mistake now and then.
No question. I mean, because looking at Fight Club, I saw it in the theater and then seeing it on Blu-ray and 4K and all that kind of stuff. I mean, you are on the edge, because a lot of people don't understand. Like, they look at it, I'm like, oh, they just fixed that in the computer. I'm like, no, this is old school. This is lab work and like craft, because now you could shoot something down the middle and gain a really crisp and crush the blacks and all that stuff in DI much easier than you could back then. So you actually were playing with stops. You were like, am I too far gone? Because you could only push or pull in the lab so much before the image is gone and you don't have anything.
Well, the thing that everybody has to appreciate is, in those days, you when you went to the lab, when you're color correcting a movie, you had red, green, and blue, and you had light and dark. That's it. No contrast, no other colors.
No power windows.
And no stopping it. There's a footage counter at the bottom of the screen, and you're sitting in there with, a guy that's been working in the lab for 40 years. He's got a piece of paper and a pencil, and you're going, 524. It's 2 points too green and 1 point too bright. And he writes it down, and 2 other shots go by. And now you got to watch it over again and go, okay. And you have to keep doing this and keep doing this and keep doing this. It's not like stop, look at it, power
Fix
window
it.
this, bring up the shot before it. Let's look at those side by side, do that.
Yeah.
Let's add contrast. Let's have 1,000 shades of pink that we can now add or take away. Let's do this and this and this. So it's a different world. Now, in all fairness, audiences are far more mature or educated than they were then, than they were 80 years ago. And so the expectations and the critical eye is all that much stronger. So I kind of feel like the technology's kept up with the audiences, and the audiences expect a certain amount. And this technology affords us to go that much more in that direction. It's really hard to get away with something rudimentary when kids grow up watching Game of Thrones.
Right. Like, you watch, that's the TV show. What TV shows did we have? Different Strokes, Hill Street Blues,
and things that were really Three's Company,
right? Like, we were raised in television in the 80s, and there's still Game of Thrones. Like, are you kidding? So yeah, now that everyone's expecting so much more, so the game you have to take your game up to that level.
You can stop a frame on your computer and analyze it. Shots have to match because they can go back and forth and look, where before there was reciprocity, which is our human brain processing the image going by, that, you think you match that to that shot, but God forbid you ever put them side by side. I bet the I bet Godfather doesn't have as many shots that are perfect as we all think it does.
Oh yeah, Gordon. The Prince of Darkness, Mr. Willis.
No disrespect. I'm just saying, like, they didn't.
No, I mean that in a good way, Like, talk about pushing.
What he did with that technology is unbelievable.
Oh my God! You look at Godfather 2, and you're just like, how did you have the balls to expose Al Pacino on a Francis Ford Coppola movie, on the sequel to Godfather, that freaking low? Like, you could barely see him, and that mastery to get to that. I mean, he's literally a cough away from it not being exposed. It's a masterwork. It's a masterwork.
I tell you what's missing from that was so great about it. And my father and Conrad and all of them did it, is they shot to a degree where there was no turning back. So that's what the movie's going to look like. Right. There was no arbitrator coming in and going, hey, you know what? That's too bright or too dark, right, and I need to open it up. You can't open it up. It's going to go milky and it's going to look really bad. So right, you have to live with what they did, And that's the drawback from the technology today is, I can color correct a movie for 3 weeks, and when I walk away, there's nothing stopping someone from going in and dialing a knob, and all of a sudden it's not what I thought it was. Now, most studios don't do that, but I've had occasions where I've left and people have made changes, which is a problem. Yeah,
and exactly. I was a colorist for 15 years, so I know. Oh, I know, my friend. Listen, I sit there and I always try to work with the DP, and the DP would be in the room. But then when he left, the producer who's paying me is like, okay, I need you to open this up a little bit more. It's just a little too dark. I'm like, oh God, what do I do? Like, you're like, this is the dude that's paying me. Like, what do I do? So there's this weird place, but you're absolutely right. Nowadays, you, as the DP, you don't have nearly the control that you did back then. Like, when your dad shot Blade Runner, it was what it was. Like, they weren't going to tweak it.
That's it. That's like, you got what you got.
So going back, we were talking about, working on other films like Social Network and Girl with a Dragon Tattoo. Social Network is interesting because, first of all, is a masterwork, man. Seriously, it is so beautifully shot. And you were using a Red 1?
Red 1, but we had the Mysterium X chip, which was the new chip.
Right.
We had Soderbergh had talked Fincher into checking out Red. He had used them on Che.
Right. Yeah.
And David and I were looking at, we went through testing all the different cameras and stuff. And Red was, Soderbergh said, look, try these new cameras out. Try this new sensor out. I think you'll love it. And we went and met Jim Gennard and Jared Land. Yeah. They were located down in Orange County at that time. And so we went down there and looked at the cameras and the footage and the new sensor, and it was absolutely beautiful. And then they started asking what we want to change on those cameras or what we need on this movie that isn't available. And we had all those rowing scenes, on those what are they called? Umbacher boats. I think there's something like that. Right. They're super fragile and lightweight, and you can't overload them. They're not meant to carry anything other than the guys rowing and stuff. And so they made us a carbon fiber camera body that weighed like 6 pounds, red 1 with the chip. And they made this and they made that. And it started this relationship that Fincher and I have enjoyed, since that film, where on Social Network, that was the Mysterium X. On Dragon Tattoo, that was the Epic.
Sure.
All prototypes, like, wires hanging out and open backs, but and Gone Girl was the Dragon,
I think so, yeah.
And so on, and then he had the Xenomorph on Mindhunter, which was meant to be handheld, but they ended up not utilizing that style. But those were those ergonomic cameras that kind of looked like a little bit like Alien.
I saw that. Yeah, they made that special for him. They called it the Xenomorph.
Yeah, and everything was like the motors to drive the lenses. You had to pick, it was meant for Leica glass. So the Leica Similux Cs all have the same size. And so the motors were attached and no cables and all these kind of nuances that over the years have evolved. And now, last year they did Mank, and that was the monochrome, which he had asked for originally for a commercial.
It was didn't he do the Justin Timberlake music video with that too?
Before that, he did. I know he did a black and white. Oh God, what's it for? He did one with Rooney Mara that was for some fragrance.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah. That campaign.
Even before that, there was something. And then I did these Levi spots with him that were, all with the monochrome. And so he got. They made Rangers, which was the newest sensor, but made the monochrome for Mank, and now
So as a cinematographer, this is heaven. You basically go into the toy shop, and you go, I would like this, I would like that. Can you make this for me? And they literally custom build what you need for your projects.
Extremely supportive and helpful, and so and so I the last film that I shot. It was on the Ranger, but I used the Airy DNA glass, and they tell me that I'm the first person to do that because they had tried to keep it mostly restricted to using with Airy cameras and stuff, but then they opened the doors a little bit, and so I shot Being the Ricardos with the 70 mil DNA primes that on the Joker and different things, and then the Red Ranger with the full sensor 8K. So it's pretty cool.
I want to talk about the Ricardos in a minute because it's stunning. On Social Network, there's 2 shots I have to ask you about. The one is, if you can, and they're pretty well known shots, so I'm sure you can get them. I'm thinking, is the overhead shot on top of the buildings, is that Social Network, or am I confusing that with Man?
It is with Jesse Eisenberg running through the Harvard campus.
And it just like stays there, and like the camera like it's attached to him almost, it looks like. And how the hell do you do that? That rig.
That was a solution to the problem that Harvard generally doesn't allow you to shoot movies on their campuses, especially a movie that's doesn't put them in great light because the infighting between all the students, and then of course the chancellor or the chairman.
Right.
And so we had to figure out a way that we could shoot a shot without moving the camera, but we wanted to do a pan and scan within the camera because we had to leave the cameras locked off so that we could shoot when the sky changed. We could get the depth of the campus. We could get all the detail of the buildings in the background. And then we would tile that together into a move. And so we put 3 cameras up there, frame to frame to frame, and let Jesse run. And it's like the only building in Cambridge that's not part owned by the university. So we picked that point in the corner and had him run by. He ran by the oldest arch going into the campus, which is, if you know anything about Harvard, is a famous archway that goes into the campus. And it's pitch black. There's I had the city fix all the street lights on both streets that you see. And then I put light bulbs on the back of the poles that you couldn't see that made downlight that he could run in and out of these pools of light. And then we had this dilemma of not the archway needed to be backlit for us to see it when he runs by it. And so we kept coming up with scenarios. I was like, let's rent a fake power truck, go on campus like we're fixing something, and just use the bright headlights and stuff and the little thing on, and no one will bother us because they'll think that you're fixing something with the power company. Fincher came up with this idea of making a battery cart light that was all self-contained and hiring a mime. And so the mime would take the cart onto campus behind the archway, turn on the light, and then start miming. The idea is that anybody would come around would think that he's lighting himself. They'd watch for 10 minutes. Even if the cops came, he would do his whole thing where he's like, I can't hear you. I don't know. And so we did that.
That's amazing.
Got the shot. We lit the archway from on campus with a mime, and then tiled that shot to get him to run through.
So basically you, I don't like to use the word stole the shot, but you stole the shot, essentially.
We stole the light source.
You stole the light source, which is amazing that a film and the people involved with a film like Social Network would need to pull those kind of indie moves to get the shot. But that's the reality of the world.
But that's the way it works. That's the great thing about film school is you're always borrowing and stealing and trying to whatever you can, into it. And honestly, that kind of happens on commercials and music videos and everything. You have to kind of go out and be aggressive to make sure you get everything all the parts that you need to make the story.
That's amazing. Now the other shot that I love, and is the rowing sequence, the one with Trent's amazing score. What is the technique to make everything look so small? I know it's a photographic technique, but can you explain it to the audience how you got that shot? Because when I saw it, I was just like, wow, I haven't seen this in a film before.
Yeah. 2 things. One, we were only given an hour and a half to shoot in the area where the regatta actually happens. And so we had to shoot some finish line stuff and this and that, and then we had to get out of there. And so we were upriver more from that, and it didn't look exactly the same. And so to avoid any of the matching issues, the idea of this shallow depth of field, super dramatic. And we had seen it on YouTube where they had done shipyards miniatures, and you see it moving. You're like, is that a model or is that real?
Oh, it's gorgeous.
And so it's just a matter of lensing and shallow depth of field and perspective. And so we did that, and it solved a lot of problems for us, and super energetic in the sense that it adds tension and kind of confusion to this race. So you don't know who's winning when or where, and the energy keeps up. And I loved the notion of locking the focus and letting the guys row in and out, because on those boats, the boat slides underneath the guy. Kind of the guy stays, and then the boat slides, and then he catches up, and then he slides again. And so that just was so dramatic to me. It really worked.
It was so basically it was a workaround to solve a problem. It was not as much of a creative decision, but then it turned into a creative decision and how you worked with it.
Yeah, I mean, we might have done it anyways because it was such a cool effect. We had talked about it before we did those scenes, but then it became a solve as well.
That's amazing. Now you've obviously been in the business for a long time. You've been around a lot of different cinematographers, young cinematographers. What are some of the biggest mistakes you see young DPs make when they first come out?
Not trusting their first thought to an image or a problem, being talked out of it, letting fear debilitate you as opposed to embracing it, so that you can stay on edge and fresh and push boundaries. I think I've seen some people so hungry to get that opportunity and so focused on films that they cherished that they try to emulate them on their first time out. And that's risky business because you don't have the kind of support on set to back up those choices if they don't work out. And if you take too long and you don't accomplish your day's work, then all of a sudden, you're sprinting through stuff and making mistakes and dropping shots, and you've not only have you not achieved your goal, you've kind of like undermined yourself. And so I think you have to keep perspective of the task at hand and know your audience in the sense of like, how much money do you have? How much time do I have? How much support am I going to get? And sometimes you want to paint with a little brush, and sometimes you want to paint with a big fat brush, because that's the way to get through that.
Right. And so it's the equivalent of me trying to go out and shoot a scene from Fight Club with, $5,000 and 6 hours. For a scene that took you maybe 2 or 3 days, and you had a much bigger support staff than I would.
Exactly. So,
and that is a mistake. Yeah, I can imagine that a lot of them, they're trying, like, I'm going to go shoot like Blade Runner. I'm like, well, it was a bigger budget.
When I was an assistant, I saw guys light for 2 hours and have like very specific, like, actor has to hit here, actor has to hit here, a little too long, but it looked great. And the actor comes in and says, I'm not going to that mark. I'm going here and here. And now it's either a redo for another 2 hours, or they're dark and not in the light, or that's all part of that relationship thing too. Like, once there's a trust and a relationship with the cast, then everybody knows that everyone's on the same team. Then we all help each other out. But when someone feels like they're being manipulated, then that's kind of, that can be problematic for sure.
Now, let's talk about your newest film, Being the Ricardos, which I had the pleasure of watching, man. I absolutely loved it. I think it's one of the best films of the year. It is, beautifully lit. And when I was watching it, I'm like, oh my God, these guys must have had so much fun shooting it, because you're like, it's Lucy and Desi, and it's obviously Aaron Sorkin directing and wrote this remarkable script. And we were kind of talking about beforehand the tightness of the script and how tight Aaron writes his scripts. What was it like working with Aaron Sorkin on an Aaron Sorkin script and playing in this the golden age of television?
Yeah, that was fantastic. It's probably as much fun as I've ever had on a set. And I think everybody that was involved in it would tell you that. Not because it was happy-go-lucky joking around, just because it was a joy every day to shoot the material, to shoot Javier and Nicole and JK, and actually the entire cast. The sets were beautiful. The atmosphere was very supportive. and it just was, the chemistry was so good amongst all the departments and everybody, because I think we all knew how good the script was, and it's something that we all have. I don't care where you're from. Everybody has a little piece of I Love Lucy in them. My girlfriend is Vietnamese and has been in the country for about 15 years now, and she knows every episode, from Vietnam.
Sure.
And so, yeah, so it has a little something for everybody, and then it's a period piece, and it's the 50s, and so it was very, very exciting. Like, I had worked with Aaron in a different capacity on Social Network, right? He wrote that script, and funny enough, the last shot of that movie, I think Fincher wanted to avoid the emotional goodbyes, and told Aaron to shoot the last shot, which was an insert of a letter coming underneath the door. So, of course, I'm still the DP. So that was our first director-DP relationship, was that insert on Social Network. And then, his dialogue is so amazing, and his tempo so exciting. And like I said earlier, he makes a complete story. It's tight. And within that, it just opens the door for creativity for all of us to contribute, and he's very open-minded about it, and he's very embellishes us to bring more to it. And for me, he had done a couple movies as a director before, including Faden shot Chicago 7, got nominated last year for it. Mm-hmm. But that movie was structured in it was half the movie takes place in a courtroom, which is so difficult. And so Aaron, being a guy that wants to progress, wanted me to bring some of the light choices and styles and stuff that Fincher and I had used over the past. Now, of course, this is a different kind of movie, and so you have to adjust your kind of style to whatever the subject matter of the story is that you're telling. But it did open the door for me to really play a lot and to capture the era, capture the romance and the magic. And then I had an opportunity to play with black and white. I got to play with flashbacks in the 40s, which I tipped my hat to Harrell and some of my grandfather, to the starlight kind of lights and eye lights that came through like a harder. And so that was really fun. And then, staying true to the era, but modernizing it a little bit. It's one of those dilemmas that you don't want to be a parody of an era. You want to bring that era to what it is, but you also have a responsibility to entertain a modern audience, right? So, if you're doing a picture in 1910, you wouldn't use glass from 1910. They only used glass from 1910 because they had to. They didn't have 1980s or 2020 glass, right? So I felt like in exploring some of the choices in cameras and lenses and light sources and all that we would stay true as much as we could, but then I would bring it to the future a little bit, Like, for example, the black and white footage of the television show I Love Lucy. A DP named Carl Freund photographed I Love Lucy. He was a feature guy. He was an inventor. He was known throughout the industry as a really a technological wizard and a master cinematographer. He won an Oscar in 1937. He invented the incident meter, which reads direct light. It's a spot meter that reflected light. And so Desi and Lucy knew this, and so they asked him to shoot this TV show with the idea of trying to solve this dilemma of shooting a 3-camera show, but shooting it as if it were a live show, but shooting on film and shooting it in front of a live audience. So all things that had not been done before. In that time or that era, if you lived in New York, you could watch a show live. If you didn't live in New York, then they filmed a TV monitor, right?
Right, yeah.
And then sent that around and then rebroadcast it. So the quality went way down. And Desi and Lucy didn't want to work on the East Coast. They wanted to live on the West Coast. And two, they wanted everybody to see the same image quality at the same time. So they decided to shoot on film, which was an extra cost, which they absorbed, which they also got the rights to after it aired the first time, which was kind of the dawning of syndication, right? So the idea was to light something from overhead, create a lighting scenario where you wouldn't have to move lights between setups, that you could move fast, and that you didn't block the audience from being able to see the talent. And the idea behind that was that Desi thought that Lucy performed better in front of a live audience, and the rest of the cast did as well when they interacted. So those things were the kind of the task that Carl Freund was given. And then when he solved it all, it was such a hit show and a technological kind of accomplishment that people would come from all over the world to watch them do this. And then more or less, that's what the 3-camera sitcoms became forever after that,
To this day. To this day, they had headphones, they had a wide shot and 2 close-ups. They talked to each other. The script supervisor kind of regulated the cameras, and then Desi, they would cut it. It'd take a week to cut, and he didn't understand why you had to watch just one camera, one reel on a moviola. And so he asked Moviola to make one where he could run all 3 reels so he could see all 3 images at the same time and know where the cuts were based on the tempo and performance. And so now, you do split screens, or you have 7 monitors, or you have whatever it is. But he had them build a Moviola where you could run all 3 cameras at the same time. And so there was a lot of innovation going on that set. That show, yeah, people don't realize it. They just look at it as like, oh, it's a sitcom. I'm like, but that sitcom changed so much about everything on a technological sense, on the story sense, with her being pregnant for the first time. They still never said the word pregnant, but
right.
That there was a pregnant woman on a national television was like a thing, and even having Desi as a Cuban lead. That was a big deal. I'm Cuban, so Desi was one of the only Cuban people I knew that were in the business, or Latinos in general, when I was growing up. And I just every Cuban on the planet knows who Desi Arnaz is. Like he's a patron saint of American Cubans. But it was such a revolutionary, and it must have just been such a ball to go back in there and play. You were playing. It just seemed when I was watching the movie. I was watching it, and it seemed like everybody was playing and having a good time from the performances, which all 4 of the leads, all should get nominated. There's no question about it because they were so good. Javier nailed it. Nicole, J.K., and the actress who plays Ethel. Nina. Oh my God, I love her in Goliath. She's wonderful in Goliath. So when I saw her pop up there, I was like, and she held her own.
Her and J.K. are in Goliath together, right?
Yeah, J.K. No, it was Billy Bob. Billy Bob's in Goliath.
But also, J.K. has a part in it because
that's right.
He made Q&A the other night.
That's right. They were, yeah. So, and she held her own with these. I mean, those 3 are.
Oh yeah, she did. She does. I'm a huge fan.
Those.
And then it's a funny thing because you have a built-in audience per se, because everybody holds that show close to their chest. Sure. But within that, and because of that, everybody is very critical about how it's being done and who represents who. And so I just have so much admiration for Nicole to put herself in that position and take that risk. Because there was a lot of animosity before it ever, long before we ever started shooting, when they announced who was being cast in what parts and whatnot. And I'm really, really pleased to see, as people take in that movie, more and more people are just like blown away by how good she is in it, how much of Lucille's character she embraces, and the true spirit of her. And she's going to get nominated. There's
no question she's going to get nominated. She almost like she was channeling Lucy.
Yeah, that's what Lucy's daughter said.
Wow.
Lucy Arnaz was extremely, extremely happy and moved to tears when she finally watched the final version.
Oh God, I could only imagine. Yeah, and Javier was just remarkable, and I mean the lighting of the film. I remember the one shot that it's not a spoiler, but there's a scene where Lucy calls everybody in to the studio late at night that scene. And when that door opens and it's raining outside and the light shafts come in, I'm like, oh, they must have had fun shooting that.
I couldn't wait to do that from the time I read the script. Like, I had that in the back of my mind, and it's so fun when it comes to fruition, you know?
Yeah,
you're waiting, you're like, okay, tonight's the night. So
it's funny because sometimes I can watch a movie, I'll go, that's the one. That's the shot that got the DP to do what to get on this project.
You're so right.
Isn't it true though? Like, so when you read a script, you're like, okay, yeah, unless obviously it's just like with David or someone you've worked with before. But if you're working with them for the first time, you look at the script and you're like, what's in this? First of all, can I tell the story? But what's in it for me? Where's my challenge? Where can I have some fun? Is that basically like, oh, I haven't done that before?
It's the good and bad. Like, you're like, oh, this is going to be amazing. Like, and then you get to like, oh my God, a boat in the middle of the lake at night. How am I going to do that? So, you know, you go back and forth the whole time, and then you settle down, and then you start to analyze it and solve all the problems, and then, you know, make the story work. And
being a cinematographer is basically solving problems 24/7, all the time. Like, there's things that are coming up constantly that you have no understanding of. Like, okay, all right, give me a second here. Let's figure this out here. Let's figure out that there. Then the actor doesn't want to stand there. Okay, so let's do this again. Like, it's constant with you. It's constant, like on a set.
I feel, yeah, I think it is, but it's also the same for the director. And
yeah.
I feel like it doesn't matter who you are, or how much money you have, or how many days you have to shoot. Problems happen, you know. Weather changes, things break, someone doesn't come out in time, something's wrong with something else, and whoever makes the best creative compromises at that moment wins, you know. And so that's you watch these masters and they solve the problems because you don't have a choice.
Right. No, you got to go through, because there's like,
I mean, you watch Storming of Normandy and Saving Private Ryan. And, you know, they shot there for a week, 2 weeks. Obviously, the weather is going to change every single day, and that's supposed to take place in a few hours. And it's sunny, and then it's cloudy, and then it's this, and then it's that. But there's enough smoke and enough action, and it's color corrected so beautifully. And it's like you're caught in the moment of the energy, and another, you know, it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And there's one other film that you did with Sasha Gervasi, Hitchcock. Right. Sasha, Sasha's a good friend. And we've talked a lot about, I've talked a lot with him about Hitchcock and how he did it. How fun was it to go back and like tread over Hitchcock's, like walk the path that Hitchcock walked sometimes, like recreating some of those scenes, man?
Very exciting. You know, again, it's not so different than being the Ricardos. And
right.
You got go down one of the paths of your idols, and you get to capture the great Anthony Hopkins playing Hitchcock, and Helen Mirren playing his wife, and you know, you're so familiar with all of his movies, you know all the shots. It's a little bit like being put back in that place, and so it's like a little kid going to Disneyland for the first time, but it's the magical movie world that we get to go visit, you know. And so it was really, really fun to shoot that, pay homage to it, and then try to, you know, Hitchcock was always an innovator, and he was always pushing boundaries, and he was doing the single take movies, and he was using this and he was using that. And we had this debate at the beginning of the movie about whether we should shoot it on film or whether we should shoot it digitally. And you know, it's like, is it sacrilegious to shoot a Hitchcock movie digitally? And ultimately, it became down a financial problem, and the producers realized the cost savings and pushed us towards a digital world. But when you go back and you think about it, like, if Hitchcock was around today, he would be the first guy using the newest technology to tell us. So in a way, you know, I didn't have that same kind of like feel like I had let down the world by not shooting it on film.
No, I don't think Hitchcock would be dying on the mantle there on the top of the hill going film forever. Like, he's not that. He'd been like, he would have grabbed an iPhone and shot. Oh God, could you imagine him like grabbing? Yeah. I always wondered, like, what would Kubrick do today? Oh my God, what would Stanley do with today's technology? Oh God, the stuff that they, you know, the masters. If you would have given the tools to those masters, what would have happened? Now,
look how good the stories were that they told already. So,
And in a time when you really needed to know your stuff, like when you shot Fight Club and when you shot film, you needed to know how to expose properly, there's so much more knowledge you need to as a cinematographer, whereas in the digital world you have a lot more leeway.
There is more leeway. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a few questions, ask all my guests. Okay. What advice would you give a filmmaker trying to break into the business today?
Watch a lot of movies, study directors, and shoot as much as you possibly can.
What is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film industry or in life?
That's a good question. I just think, I kind of mentioned it earlier, is to embrace your fears and utilize that, because look, I've done a lot of films, but when you walk through that elephant stage door the first time, or even every day that morning, or even before that, when you're driving up on a street and you go past 22 trucks before you get to they drop you off in front of the set, you start, the insecurity starts, and you're like, oh my God, this is the day that I'm going to get discovered that I don't know what I'm doing. And you walk through that stage door or into that set or onto that house, and you look around, and it's all overwhelming, and people are coming up like, 1,000 questions start happening, and you just got to sit and process, and you watch the scene, you block it out. Obviously you've been there before and you have a plan and stuff, but utilizing it, making it come together, you got to trust yourself and know that it'll come and you'll solve the problems, and embrace all that insecurity. Don't let it get the best of you, because that's when you make mistakes, or you question yourself. And again, I said that before, is like, go with what you thought the first time. It's usually the right choice, whatever your gut's telling you, and if it doesn't feel right, you'll realize it the first time you're watching the monitor or looking through the eyepiece and go, you know what, something's not working out here. I got to change this and stuff.
And 3 of your favorite films of all time?
Blade Runner, Godfather, stuck between like No Country for Old Men or Shawshank.
Oh, Shawshank. Yeah, it's my top.
The original Wonka.
Oh yeah, nice. All good choices. And one last question specifically to you: was there a lesson, or what was the biggest lesson you took away from your father when it comes to lighting and being a cinematographer?
It's not what you light; it's what you don't like that has the most impact.
That's great advice. Great advice. And where can people watch Being the Ricardos?
It's released December 10th in theaters. I kind of looked around and see where it was going to be playing, so I think it's a limited release. Mm-hmm. And then on December 21st, it's on Amazon.
That's amazing. Jeff, man, thank you so much for being on the show, bro. I really appreciate it. I can geek out a little bit more with you, I'm sure. But I appreciate your time, my friend. Thank you again for being on the show, and continued success, and please keep making movies, my friend.
Well, you're too kind. Thanks, Alex.